Each season, summer, fall, and winter, spring, the Loft schedules a huge variety of writing classes. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce one of our instructors, Robin McLean. Robin, could you introduce yourself and tell us how you got involved at the Loft?
Hi, Suzanne. Thank you for inviting me to join you. I found out about the Loft years and years ago. Back when I first got out of graduate school, I submitted one of my stories to a contest through the New Rivers Press, and I won one of the slots, and my story came out, and I got to go read at the Loft in Minneapolis. My parents lived in Peoria, Illinois at the time, so we drove up there, and I was one of the very first readings. And I remember going there and feeling real comfortable with the audience and people. I think the story that they picked was a really, I think, a kind of a funny story. And there was a couple of people who were laughing really hard, which made me really happy. So I had really, really warm feelings to the Loft. And then in the meantime, I started teaching and publishing stories, and I was teaching out on the East Coast. And then I came to Nevada to live, and I've been running a little writer's retreat out here. And I thought it would be kind of nice to teach somewhere, but Minneapolis is really, really far from Nevada. And strangely, of course, during COVID, the opportunity to teach in faraway places became available when it wasn't before. And so I thought, well, I love the Loft. I've met them again at AWP and shake hands and hugs and all that kind of thing. But I decided, well, I'll throw my hat in the ring as a teacher because it became possible in this weird time that we've been in. And I've been teaching generative one-day workshops. I'm hoping to teach a novel workshop sometime. So that's how.
I'm glad you brought up the Writers Retreat in Nevada because that obviously is your beautiful scenery right now. And it is, quote, you call it an extreme remote writer's outpost. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you even got started there and what that experience is like?
Well, I found this place totally randomly while I was traveling with my first book, Reptile House, which came out in 2015. And I was driving the country with my niece and nephew from bookstore to bookstore, camping out, no GPS. I gave them this book called an atlas. And I said, this is an atlas and it's got maps in it. And they had to navigate us to California. And we went on the loneliest highway in America, which is Highway 50 in Nevada. And we camped, and turns out they knew an old family friend who was close by. So off of the loneliest road in America, we drove on a 40-mile dirt road, dead center in the middle of the state, 3 big mountain ranges that run north and south. And then I visited, we had ranch breakfast, saw some beautiful scenery and kept going. And then I came back a year later, then I came back a year later, then I came back a year later, and I stayed, and I said, this place is great for adventuresome guests, but this is exactly where all writers need to be because it's beautiful and quiet, and the internet isn't very good, and there's wild horses coming in and out. And so we just invite people to come out here and work on really big projects that they have a hard time in the chaos of the world. There is chaos here, but it's all wild horse chaos or donkey chaos or hummingbird chaos and broken water line chaos, which is what we're dealing with today. So I've got my work clothes on. But yeah, it's beautiful and about as remote as you can get in the lower 48 of the United States. And I like it here.
And you were also a lawyer and a potter before you pursued your MFA and became a writer and a teacher. How do all those different experiences that you've had in your life influence your art?
Well, I mean, I think that everything that anyone ever does in their life can and should influence their art. When I was a potter, I was a production potter. I made dishes, dinnerware, mugs, bowls, and I'm very grateful that I did that. I thought of myself as a crafts person in my writing life, and when you're in my pottery life, and of course in your writing life, you also have to manage craft. You have to learn how to do things. You have to mess up. You have to try again. You have to ask friends, like, how do I do this better? Because there's an element, of course, of your own genius, your creativity, but you also have to manage things effectively for the person receiving your project, your pot, your story, your poem, your play. And so I feel like the discipline of accepting the kind of failure, success, trying something a little harder, how do you manage that harder thing, was a really good lesson for writing, because when I went back to get my MFA, I was desperately trying to do things that I did not know how to do. So finding ways to uh, manage your idea is pretty much always a craft problem. It's always a craft problem. So I think it works pretty well. And of course, lawyering is an issue of precision of language. And so that fits in pretty well. It's a weird combo, but it works pretty well, I think.
Well, a lot of our students at the Loft are coming into writing maybe for the first time in their lives when they're a little bit older, or they've had like a totally different background. They've never really written anything before. And your class, which focuses on generative writing, that can be really freeing, but I think it can also be kind of frightening for people who've never written much before. And so how do you set up your classroom so it feels like really welcoming and like this sort of safe space for people to create?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important. And I think of the workshop space as sort of truly a sacred space where you're helping each other and you're understanding that it's a vulnerable space. And so I think saying that ahead of time is really important. I like to go around the room, whether that's digital room or an actual room, and have people describe themselves and where they are and what they hope to achieve. It's uncomfortable to speak in that space. And so I try really hard to make it as easy feeling and fun and not anonymous. Of course, it is kind of anonymous. People have never met each other before, but I want people to feel safe and excited and comfortable, and that this is going to be a fun time. It's not going to be pressure. It's not going to be some kind of idea of achievement. I do not think of writing as good or bad. I think of it as an exploration and sort of a way to find a way to the effect that you want on this other human being, this reader out there, which is a miraculous thing to attempt. So I think of it as an adventure with friends who you might just have met, but it's also an opportunity to find people who you might have an affinity with and go forward with, because finding readers or friends to share work with is often occurs in these groups. And so I just try to create an atmosphere where everybody feels relaxed as quickly as possible. We laugh, we read, we try not to judge at all, because the creative process is really slow and very mysterious to me. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I also want to ask sort of a follow-up question about your own creative process, because you write novels and short stories. So how do you come at these two different kinds of fiction in, I guess, what would have to be different ways, but also probably similar ways creatively?
Okay, so until fairly recently, I consider myself a short fiction writer. If someone said, "Are you going to write a novel?" I would say, "No, I can't write a novel." I thought of a short story as the largest thought that I could hold at one time. So you can write kind of long ones and short ones, but the idea of writing a novel was, I just thought, that's not my thing. But of course, what happened to me and what happens to a lot of people is you write a story. I wrote a really long story that kind of felt like it could keep going. And so that was in some ways, this question you're asking was exactly the problem that I had when I started working on my recent novel that's coming out, is that how do you expand past the size that you can hold in your head? And that was really, really hard for me. And it took a lot of time and a lot of patience and a lot of space in between times when I was working on it. So I would work on the novel and then kind of run into a wall and then work on a short story. And I wrote a bunch of short stories during that time. But it's a scale. It was for me, and it's different for everybody, I think, a matter of scale and a lot of patience, because if you're going to write something short, you're going to mess up a lot writing something short. So if you're going to write something really long, you're going to mess up 10 times as much, and it requires more patience and trust in the process that is, again, mysterious. And I hope that answers your question, but I feel like they're very different from each other, but you simply have to persevere and find time for that, and find friends who will support you during those moments where you think, I'm stuck or I can't do this. You need a community of people who are going to encourage you, which I have, and I think everybody has to have. And the Loft is a good place to find that. It's hard to find it just in your regular world because people are good-natured and they love you, but they don't know how to talk about writing. So to find writers to talk to is really, really important.
You mentioned that finding that community, was something really important in your classes. But besides that aspect, what is it that you hope that students are going to take away from your classes?
Well, I feel like being alive in the modern world is difficult, and we have busy lives and we have a lot of responsibilities. But to me, being having something fascinating to you, and if you're a writer, probably writing is fascinating to you, it enlivens your life. To have a project to be working on privately or with friends, to me, I feel kind of sorry for people who don't write, because to me, writing is so interesting and it's so challenging, and it keeps your brain watching the world and noticing things and listening in a way that's fully engaged and fully alive. So yes, I want everyone who takes my workshops to publish and win the Pulitzer and Nobel Prize and all that kind of thing. But more than that, I want people to feel their life happening, engage with life, engage with the world around them, and see and hear and feel and experience, and then let their mind go a little bit further than it's ever gone before. That's what I want to have happen if they take one of my workshops. And that would be the goal for me at the end of that little amount of times, that they could feel the energy in themselves and their own curiosity, their own creativity that a lot of people aren't sure they have, but I am sure that they have. So
Well, for our final question, I'd like to know what it is about teaching that really draws you in.
I love other people's minds. I'm real fascinated by the cool things that people think that I don't think. And that's part of my own experience of feeling alive, is to be amazed by what people write in a really short period of time. Like I say, I'm real interested in processes. I'm real interested in distracting the conscious adult mind and letting the unconscious creative mind out. And I believe that it's really, really close to the surface. I try to trigger that for people. And I am amazed and fascinated and enchanted by what I experience in those settings. And it gives me a lot of energy. So that's why I like to teach. I've taught college a lot, and I love that age group, but to see people who are closer to my age finding that joy when they read something that they just wrote that they weren't expecting they were going to write, it's really exciting for me. So that's why I do it.
Well, for all of our viewers, you can find Robin's classes as well as our full summer lineup by visiting loft.org/classes. Robin, thank you again so much for being here with me today.
Thank you.